I'll be honest, I'm going to use this opportunity to get some film recommendations from the two of you because I was introduced to the world of Satyajit Ray very late in life. And the first film that I watched of him was only a few weeks ago, The Big City. And I was very pleasantly surprised. But I want to ask the two of you, do you remember the first film of Satyajit Ray that you watched? Shabana ma'am, we can start with you.
Okay, Panchali. When I was very little, and
Yeah.
mother, who was an actress also, Shaukat Kafi, she'd seen it, and she was so thrilled with it, and she kept talking about it. And I was too young at that moment, at that point in time, but even so, she insisted that I should see the film. And the only thing I recollect is it didn't look like a film; it looked like life. It didn't look like a film at all. It looked like life. And she said, well, isn't that the point? And isn't that the new thing that's happening in Japan? And so obviously I got interested in him because it was my mother who introduced me to him.
Yeah, I think the first film that I remember is the children's film that he made um, in the 60s, Gopi Gain Bakabain. It's an adaptation of a very popular children's story that his grandfather wrote, and that's been read through generations. You know, he comes from a family of writers, and his grandfather and his father were all writers in the family. So he adapted that story and made a film about a singer and a drummer who've been thrown out of their villages because they make too much racket. And then in the jungle, the king of ghosts appears and gives them a boon, three boons. So they can sing, they can ask for food, and they can travel endlessly. So it's a delightful film. That's the one I remember as my first film comprehensively, because Pathir Pachali was before my time. I saw that later. And we saw his films, you know, as they were released in the 70s and as we were growing up. And many films we understood, at least I understood, say the politically implicated films of the city trilogy. Those I really caught on to much later, the nuances and the political inflections. But yeah, Gopi Gain was the delightful story that I saw, and generations have fed on it. It's got this very important anti-war message, which for today's audience, I think holds a lot of relevance, that music can be universal and music can stop violence.
Oh, that's interesting. I look forward to seeing that one if I can. And I want to just come back to my experience. As I mentioned, Mahanagar, the big city, was the first one that I watched. I went in blind. I didn't read anything about it. I didn't watch any trailer, nothing, because I was like, I've heard so much about Satyajit Ray. I don't want to have any preconceived notions. And I was so pleasantly surprised because the story was so simple, the storytelling, the characters, the theme, even like the symbolism of the lipstick, everything was so simple, yet it was so impactful. And I realized what the hype is, if I may. And I was like, okay, now I'm intrigued. Now I need to watch more. Sangeeta ji, a question for you. You have been part of different retrospectives of Satyajit Ray in the past with BFI. How is this year going to be any different?
Well, this year is very special because it's marking his centenary and it's also marking the 75th year of Indian independence. And the BFI has made a huge effort to collate all the 38 films from Ray's filmography. So this is a lifetime opportunity to see all his films. And most of the time, retrospectives are programmed chronologically. And I thought I would just break away from that and program the films thematically. So I found some key themes, identified some key themes, and then programmed the season accordingly. It's a long season which will run through July and August. So it's a great opportunity to see all these films and restored versions, because they're digitally restored. As you saw with Mahanagar, it's black and white, but it's crisp and clean and such a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Shabana ji, I've heard about this story of how you met him and you wanted to do more films with him after Shatranj Ke Khiladi, but unfortunately that did not happen. Is there any one film or one character that you wish you could have played from one of his films?
Every single character. Not one, every single character I would have liked to do. because he was a master storyteller, a master observer of life, uh, its frailties, its strengths, its complexities, its simplicity. He was just a master of everything he surveyed. He was, in the true sense, a total auteur, because he took charge of the film and then everything was according to what he wanted. And yet, for me, it was a very pleasurable experience because I went there thinking that I'm going to be dealing with a strict school teacher who's going to tell me exactly what to do. And he gave me so much freedom that came as a huge surprise uh, to me. So he had different ways of dealing with different actors. And I was one of those fortunate ones where he didn't give me too much instruction. Whatever he told me was very, very.
Do you still consider yourself one of the finest dramatic actresses?
Well, after Satyajit Ray has said that about you, does anybody dare say
Have to
it?
believe it. Do you think there's any filmmaker today who has the same kind of sensibilities towards storytelling, cinema, characters? And this is a question for the both of you.
Well, he was a product of his time, you see. He was at the time when a new wave cinema in Europe had just started. But the interesting thing about Ray was that he was a fan of every kind of filmmaker. You know, he liked क्या नाम था उसका संगीता the American Bill uh, can be as commercial
As
and
commercial, Bill Wilder, yeah.
yeah.
Well, because I'm part of the Bengali film tradition, there have been filmmakers very strongly influenced by Ray. Not always thematically, but I think in terms of treatment and in the study of characters and in the way that a story is told. I think our primary women filmmaker, Aparna Sen, is hugely influenced by Ray, and that shows in the first film that she did, 36 Chaurangi Lane, which even till now is such a significant film from India. My long-term collaboration with my friend Rituparna Ghosh also allowed me to see how much he was influenced by Ray. And the smaller films that he made before he made the big Bollywood actors came in and the scale grew huge. Apart from that huge fascination with Ray, with Ray and Tagore, a sort of Bergmanish setting up of characters talking across a table or just sitting in a room, and there's dialogue, or sometimes it's non-dialogic, but the very insightful psychoanalysis that happens in such scenes, I think there Ray had a very big part to play for Rituparna Ghosh as well. I think Anurag Kashyap, who's also spoken quite often about Ray's influence, has been carrying that. So it's a legacy, or influences are not always overt. They come through, and you begin to spot them. If you know a master's craft well, or his filmography well, then you begin to see reflections and echoes in other places, and that's really fabulous.
Absolutely. I do agree with Anurag Kashyap being one of them. Sorry, Shabana, go ahead.
Shyam Benegal. To Shyam Benegal is given the credit of sort of presenting what is known now as parallel cinema, art cinema, to the film. Because before that, obviously, there was Ray, but there was Mrinal Sen, who had made Bhuvan Show, and a couple of films. But really, it was with Shyam Benegal that the parallel cinema movement started. And in his approach, in his realistic approach, he was very much like Ray, inspired by him, certainly.
Absolutely.
He also has a documentary on Ray.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Shyam Benegal does?
Yeah.
Oh,
you'll find it on YouTube. You should catch it. It's very, very good.
Oh, that's a good recommendation. I'll keep that in mind. Someone who's a beginner like me and either hasn't watched a lot of Satyajit Ray or is slowly getting introduced to it, what would be your top 2 recommendations of Ray's work? Sangeeta ji, we'll start with you.
Well, if you haven't seen Pothe Pachali or the Apu trilogy, I would recommend that as a whole, to watch all of them together to see how an entire generation was influenced by cinema, which was still a very new, modern technology at that moment. And then also his fascinating exploration of the female psyche, of the woman question, the idea of tradition and modernity, and how that plays on a woman's life. I would ask you to see Charulata.
Yes. Shabana ji, what about you?
Devi and Jalsagar. I mean, of course, the other, the Pathe Panchali and the Apu trilogy is a given, but Devi is fascinating. Devi is really fascinating. And the beauty of Jalsagar. I mean, I can go on watching it again and again. But I mean, there's a whole host of
and so different, really, all of them.
Say one or two. And for you, it's easier now because it's all available in English subtitles, you know. So that makes them more accessible.
Yeah. Sorry, I do have one question. Since you mentioned the language, what language did he narrate his stories in? Because there was Hindi, there was Bengali, there was English, Urdu, and Shatranj Ke Khiladi was in Urdu, Hindi. So what was his narration in typically?
His narration in the film or to the actor?
To the actor.
To the actor, it was in English.
Okay. Because that changes the nuances a little bit, I'm assuming, right?
No, but that's because Shatranj Ke Khiladi was in a language that he was not familiar with. So he could speak Hindi and I couldn't speak Bengali. So the only choice that we had was English. And he spoke and wrote beautiful English.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this chat, and thank you for all the recommendations for me and the viewers. And I look forward to all the restored films of him at BFI South Bank. So thank you.